This is the app we're creating today. This is an example using an input field. This is different than last time because last time we just did increment actions and decrement actions. They didn't pass any values along with the actions themselves. In this case, we have to pass the values of whatever we type here. And so that's where we're going today. So this is a new type of application that has inputs. There's actually different ways you might handle inputs in React and Redux. This is going to cover this particular way. Later on, we'll talk about some other examples I've seen. But this is how you would actually push a piece of state from an input all the way through the Redux actions and dispatching and stores and all the way back down. So that's what we're going to do in this video. All right, let's build it. We're starting with this basic React app that's created from Create React App. No changes so far. Let's go through the steps of integrating all this. So we need to npm install Redux and react-redux. Okay, now it's all installed. Let's get it started back up, and now we're good to go. Okay, so we have our blank normal application. So since we're going for an input mirror where we have an input and then we're showing that input value somewhere else, we'll need basically some sort of input component. And so let's go ahead and create it, and we'll call it input mirror. So same thing as the last few videos, we need to import React. We need to create the component. We'll create it as a pure functional component. And let's see, return. And so the idea will be is that we'll have this input and it will get its value from props. And we will have a display that will mirror that, which will also come from the same value. So now what we need to do is think back, okay, in old school React, what happened? How would you do this? Well, in old school React, we would handle like an onChange. We'd take the onChange event here, give it a function, and then change the state. Well, we're not using old school React. We're not doing the state thing, at least the component state. We're going to be using Redux as our state. So here's our basic component. That's where we're going. Let's export him. And let's get him on the page. So import input mirror from the file. And then we can put him in here. I guess we don't need any of this stuff. Except, let's see, let's get rid of this logo, because if we don't get rid of this logo, then we'll probably get a warning. Here is our input. The paragraph doesn't have anything in it yet. You can't see it. Just so we can see a value, let's put in a value of props for input value. Of course, this will come from the store in the future when we get this hooked up, but we can see right now that the high is appearing in both places. So if we can hook this up to the store so that we get the value from there, we'll be in good shape. All right, so let's, on that note, let's create the store. we're going to import this from Redux. So this function is what we're going to use to create the store. You might recall that whenever you're setting up something, you always want to set up a default or an initial state. So here we go, initial state. And our key that we were going to use, even though this doesn't technically have to match what we use in the component. But here we go, in initial state, input value, blank string. Let's create our reducer. Reminder that reducers are just functions. They take two things. They take the state, which we will go ahead and set to the initial state. So when the reducer is first run, it will use this initial state and the action. As we have been doing, I am going to put a console log here so we can see the actions as they come through the reducer. And let's return the state. Whenever we're actually incrementing, whenever we're actually setting a value, incrementing, that was the last two projects. When we're actually setting a value, we will make changes to the state. Right now, we're just going to return it because at the very least, in a reducer, you need to always be returning the state. And let's see, let's create the store from this. Now we will use this function that we imported. So create store, pass in the reducer. There we go. And then let's export a store. So now that we have this, we can go to our component, to the input mirror, and hook this up with react-redux. And so we've already imported React, so we don't need that. Let's import connect, which is a function from react-redux. And what connect does is it basically wraps our component in a react-redux component and connects the props and the functions for dispatch that we're going to supply below. And so here's our functional component. We are going to create another function called I think I did those before as functions. You can do it like this. Map component, props. State to props. Map state to props is the normal name for that. Okay. So this just has to be a function. Used the function keyword before. Let's just do this, just to show you that it can be done in different ways. So the state is going to come in here. And so now what we need to return is return an object with whatever key or keys that the component is going to need. We know the component needs input value, so we will use that, and it does happen to match the value there. And so there in state. This value, this bit right here, this state will be ultimately what comes out of here, right here. Okay, so state changes come out there, and then they come into here, and then state gets mapped to props like so, and then input value goes right there. So let's connect map state to props, pass in our component into what comes out of here, which creates the wrapped component. And so now let's see if we do get the same error that we've been getting, which is actually good news, because that means we've properly wrapped things. And so you should be familiar with that now. I need to get the store, so import store from store. So this will run this index.js file. We'll get our store, and then I can pass it in as props right here. And we can see that I have an error. And so let's read the error screen here and figure out what I did wrong. It certainly seems to be like a syntax error. After all, it does say syntax error. Okay, so line 7, it's mad right there. So let's go to our index.js, which is here in the store, and say line 7, what's wrong? Well, it says its unexpected token expected a semicolon. Well, I've confused it because I have made a mistake. And the thing I made a mistake with here is since I basically started this off as an arrow function, but didn't finish it. So let's do this. Now we have our proper syntax. Okay. So we have our input and we have our paragraph. I have no idea at this point if this is really working. So let's just save some default state. And yay, that means I got it right. And so the default state has fadza. And so fadza shows up in both of those two places. So let's get rid of that and go back to our blanks. So we've now hooked up things. And let's open up the Chrome tools here and go, okay, what do we got? Well, this is Redux init. So the reducer was run with this action. We've seen this before in both of the previous videos. Whenever you start your store up, Redux is going to dispatch its own action, its init action, to the store. And this sets up the initial state. This is the point at which our initial state right here is actually going to be put into the store state. And so it dispatches this init action, which of course runs through the reducer. And then the state changes, and so therefore the component re-renders. And that's where we are right now. We have not created our own action. This is an action that was created by Redux. So they did all that. Now let's handle an action from us. Now this is different than last time. In the last time, whenever we'd increment or decrement, we were just sending actions. In this case, we have an input value. There's a string that needs to be passed along. And so type isn't actually sufficient anymore. That property must still be there on the action, but there needs to be more. But that's cool. This is actually normal and easy to handle. So let's go ahead and set up our switch. And we're going to look at action.type. And what we want to do is we want to create or set up a case to handle this state change. And we need to call it something. Since this can be a pretty bland name, since this is the only thing this app's going to do. So input change. So that's it. So in the case of input change, I want to return object.assign, which is going to create a new object right there and take the existing state, copy it into it, and then what we want to change will be in this object right there. And so this gets returned, and you might be remembering what happened last time and go, hey, wait a minute, don't you need to take this return state and move it into the switch? Because we'll get a warning. And yes, actually, I do want to do that. So we can get rid of that warning. Okay, cool. So what this will do is this will handle an action called input change. But what are we changing? Well, we're changing input value. Okay. And what are we changing it to? Now, this is the new thing. Whenever we send our action, we need to send more than just the type. We need to send a value, and we can call that anything we want. Let's say we have an action with a value property called, well, value, or text, just so it will be different. I'm going to call it text. So what we can do is say action.text. So whenever we send the action, we just need to make sure that the text we want in the input value goes into that property. Goes into that value. So let's see if we can do that. So if we go to our input mirror, now we need to map dispatch to, I actually don't remember the name of this one. It is just a function name, but yeah, match dispatch to props. That's the typical name. Map dispatch to props. And so this dispatch function here is the dispatcher that comes from Redux. And so what we need to do is we need to, just like map state to props, return an object and say input changed. This is just a property on this object, and we need to put a function here. Now let's go ahead and just do this like so. And so what I want to do is whenever this thing fires, console log, And so then come in here and say on change props dot input changed. So this should make it into the props and go here. Of course, this will only make it into the props if we come down here and add this here. Okay, so let's see if that console log fires. I sure hope it does. Okay, the change event is happening. All right, well, how do we get the value out? Well, this goes back to regular React. At this point, this has nothing to Redux at all. This function right here is getting fired. Let's see if we get an event object passed in. Let's try this out. Oh, there we go. All the stuff we're used to in React from an event. And so if we look in the event.target.value, we can actually get the text, the string that's in that input. This is, once again, just like regular React. This has nothing to do with Redux or react-redux. Now, it doesn't look the same because, hey, we're in this map dispatch to props function. This isn't React. Well, technically, yeah. But this function is getting attached to onChange. And so this is firing it just like a normal onChange. And so therefore, it's passing the event object, and we can get that value. So now, if we type along, we should see some things. All right. Now, the state itself is not being updated. And so therefore, we're never getting any values in there, which is why it always looks like one letter. But this right here is happening. The value is coming through here. So what we now need to do is dispatch that action. So let's create the action. And normally you have to have at least this, but in this case, we are passing another value in as well. And so type and text. So let's see. We did call it text here, so that's one thing I wanted to check. And so this right here is what we're going to pull out here, just to make that clear. Now, this is the name of the action. So there it is, like so. And now let's dispatch it and see what happens. Okay. Well, clearly I'm doing something wrong. And so the reducer is always getting an action right here, and well, yes, I am doing something wrong. I've done something stupid. It's getting the action. I am dispatching it, but I'm never actually taking the value out of the input and putting it in. Of course it's not working. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I typed in Apple. We can see with every change, it's creating the action, it's dispatching the action, the reducer is running, the state changes, therefore the component re-renders on every single keystroke. Like so. All right? So let's talk through that flow. Let's see it in code. Okay, so whenever this change happens, right here, so whenever somebody types a letter in, it will fire this function. This function came from right here. And that function is defined as this. And so, whenever this function fires, it gets the value out of the input. And it's going to create an action out of it. And it's going to give it this type called input change and take the value out and put it in a property called text. This can be any name. Can't be type. But pretty much any name is valid right there. It's fine. This is special. Type is special. Text is not. And so we take this action and we dispatch it. And when we dispatch it, it goes into the magical land of Redux, which makes it go ultimately into the reducer. So it hits right here. Here's our action. We can see right here that the text is A, and that is exactly what I typed. And so the action comes in here with a text of A and a type of input change, comes here, it falls into this case, And so we do object assign. So we do this because we are creating a brand new object each time, or I should say it this way. We're creating a brand new state object each time. And so we're starting off with a blank state object, and then we're copying everything that's currently in state into there. And then we're going to then override with this. And so input value is going to be replaced by whatever happens to be an action.text. If nothing matches, and there is no case at this point, except for the initial case where nothing matches, but at least in that case, it'll hit the default. But in our only other case, it's going to hit input change and run through here. Whenever the state is returned, what will then happen is, if we go back to our diagram, when the state is changed, the component will see that, the component will re-render, and that's when we see our value. And then the next time we type into the input, it starts that whole cycle over again. Okay, so that's how you can create an app with Redux and React that just handles simple inputs. So that was a little different than last time, not much harder. The fundamental difference between the last two apps we made and this one is, in this one, we learned how to pass values along. It's not just actions that change state. We actually had to supply the value as a part of the action. And so that's how we did it. We just created an action. Let's go see it. We just created an action and then put the value from the input into there. And then we went forward. Now something you'll sometimes see is, instead of creating this other line, this actually does the same thing. If you take this here, because this is just an object literal, we can create it. Just to show you a slight variation, this is perfectly valid as well. Okay? So that's it for this time.